They tell us history is written by the victors, but the truth is, history is written in blood, ambition, and the collapse of empires. Welcome to Historical Lessons. Let's dissect the past to understand our future. In 221 BC, a single man ended 2.5 centuries of apocalyptic bloodshed. He forged the concept of China out of fractured warring kingdoms. But to build an eternal empire, Yin Zhang had to become something less than human and something far more terrifying than a god. To understand his monstrous ambition, we must analyze the geopolitical meat grinder he was born into. The Warring States period wasn't mere conflict, it was an industrialized ecosystem of death. 7 massive states engaged in a zero-sum game of total war where millions were slaughtered for minor territorial gains. Yin Zhang was not born in the safety of a royal palace. He was born in 259 BC as a political hostage in the enemy state of Zhao. From his first breath, his life was currency. He grew up surrounded by people who wanted to murder him daily. The foundational trauma of his psychology occurred when his father fled back to Qin, abandoning young Zhang and his mother to the fury of the Zhao. This instilled a dark, permanent lesson in the boy's mind. Trust is a lethal vulnerability. Even blood will betray you for power. His survival was engineered by a brilliant, ruthless merchant named Liu Bang. Liu saw the boy's father not as a prince, but as an undervalued asset. He orchestrated their escape, proving that in a corrupt world, even the divine right of kings can be bought, sold, and manipulated. Returning to the state of Qin, the young prince entered a society unlike any other. Qin was not a state with a military, it was a military with a state. It operated on a brutal meritocracy where social status was dictated entirely by the number of enemy heads severed. At just 13, Yin Zhang ascended the throne, but he was a king in name only. Real power rested with Liu Bang, now chancellor, and his mother's new lover, Lao Ai. The young king was forced to endure the agonizing humiliation of supreme powerlessness while wearing the crown. In 238 BC, Lao Ai launched a bloody coup to replace the king with his own illegitimate children. Yin Zhang's response was a masterclass in calculated terror. He crushed the rebellion and ordered Lao Ai torn apart by horse-drawn chariots, a ruthless broadcast of his newfound unyielding authority. The boy was dead. The tyrant was born. He purged Liu Bang, driving his former savior to suicide, and placed his own mother under house arrest. By 22, Yin Zhang held absolute, undivided control over the most lethal military machine in the ancient world. The Great Conquest had begun. To conquer the world, Yin Zhang abandoned the Confucian belief that humans are inherently good. Instead, he embraced legalism, a dark totalitarian philosophy dictating that humans are fundamentally selfish, cowardly, and greedy. The only way to govern such creatures was through the ruthless, unflinching application of terror and law. He appointed Li Si as his chief minister, the architect of this new nightmare state. Together, they instituted a collective punishment. If one man committed treason, his entire bloodline, his neighbors, and his colleagues were executed. Fear became the invisible chain binding the entire Qin population. The state of Qin was transformed into an ancient military-industrial complex. Weapons were mass-produced with standardized, interchangeable parts centuries before the Industrial Revolution. Every citizen was either a farmer feeding the war machine or a soldier greasing its gears with enemy blood. There was no middle ground. But Ying Zhang was not just a butcher, he was a strategic genius. He knew a unified alliance of the 6 remaining states could crush him. So he deployed an army of spies and diplomats loaded with gold to bribe enemy ministers, sowing discord and paralyzing their defenses from within. He employed a ruthless salami-slicing strategy, taking the enemy apart piece by piece. In 230 BC, he swallowed the weakest state, Han. The geopolitical equilibrium was shattered. The other states watched in paralyzed horror as the Qin juggernaut began its systematic, unstoppable march across the continent. 2 years later, he targeted Zhao, the state where he had suffered as a political hostage. This wasn't just conquest, it was deeply personal vengeance. After breaking their armies, Ying Zhang personally traveled to the fallen capital to execute every single family that had slighted him during his traumatic childhood. Panic swept through the remaining kingdoms. In 227 BC, the desperate crown prince of Yan realized military resistance was futile. He resorted to the only weapon left, targeted decapitation. He dispatched a legendary assassin, Jing Ke, armed with a poisoned dagger hidden inside a map of surrendered territories. In the Grand Throne Room, Jing Ke unrolled the map, revealing the deadly blade. He lunged at the king. A frantic, humiliating chase ensued around a massive bronze pillar. The most powerful man in the world was reduced to scrambling for his life, his own guards paralyzed by strict laws. Ying Zhang barely managed to draw his long sword and strike the assassin down. He survived, but the psychological damage was irreversible. The attack didn't just wound his pride, it weaponized his paranoia. From that moment on, his fear of death morphed into a terrifying, all-consuming psychosis. His retaliation was apocalyptic. The state of Yan was pulverized. When the state of Wei resisted, Qin engineers didn't bother scaling the walls. They diverted the Yellow River, flooding the capital of Daliang and drowning hundreds of thousands of civilians. He weaponized nature itself to achieve total submission. By 221 BC, the impossible was achieved. The 6 rival states were ash. Ying Zhang stood alone at the summit of the known world. The title of king was suddenly insufficient for his colossal ego. He needed a designation that elevated him above mortal men and into the realm of deities. He invented a new word, Huangdi, or emperor. He claimed the title Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of Qin. He believed his bloodline possessed a divine mandate to rule all under heaven, arrogantly declaring that his dynasty would last for 10,000 generations. The arrogance was as infinite as his empire. But conquering a continent with swords is vastly different from governing it. The old feudal system, which caused centuries of civil war, had to die. Qin Shi Huang ruthlessly abolished hereditary nobility. He sliced the empire into 36 commanderies, directly controlled by appointed, easily replaceable bureaucrats. Absolute centralization was born. To bind this fractured mass of territory, he standardized reality itself. He enforced a single currency, unified weights and measures, and even mandated the width of cart axles so they could travel uniformly on state-built roads. But his most brilliant, insidious reform was the standardization of the written language. A single written script meant that a decree issued in the capital could be read and obeyed at the furthest borders, regardless of local dialects. It was the ultimate tool of mass communication and control. But physical dominance could not silence the whispers of the mind. The intellectuals were restless. Confucian scholars constantly criticized the emperor's brutal legalist regime by comparing it unfavorably to the glorious, virtuous past of ancient kings. To Qin Shi Huang, history was a weapon being used against him. His chancellor, Li Si, proposed a horrifyingly simple solution: erase the past entirely. In 213 BC, the infamous decree was issued, the burning of books. All philosophical treatises, all poetry, and all historical records of rival states were ordered to the flames. It was not merely censorship, it was a psychological genocide. Qin Shi Huang attempted to reset time itself to year zero. Knowledge became a strict state monopoly. Only practical manuals on agriculture, medicine, and divination were spared. Anyone caught discussing the banned poetry of the past was executed in the streets. The intellectual soul of a magnificent civilization was systematically suffocated beneath a blanket of state-sponsored terror. But ideas are resilient. They live in minds, not just on bamboo. When scholars secretly hoarded banned texts or criticized his paranoia, the emperor snapped. In 212 BC, he reportedly ordered 460 scholars to be buried alive in the capital, a gruesome broadcast that free thought was a capital offense. Having paralyzed his internal enemies with fear, he turned his paranoid gaze outward. To the north, the Xiang Yu tribes threatened his fragile, newly built reality. To lock them out, and perhaps to lock his people in, he initiated the most megalomaniacal engineering project in human history, the Great Wall. The Great Wall was not merely a defensive structure, it was a continental meat grinder. Hundreds of thousands of peasants, convicts, and scholars were marched north to build it. For many, it was a death sentence. The wall became known as the longest cemetery on earth. This colossal barrier reflected the emperor's internal state. It was a physical manifestation of his ultimate paranoia, a desperate attempt to lock the chaotic world out and keep his rigid, controlled reality in. But while the wall could stop barbarian cavalry, it could not stop time. Ying Zhang's true enemy was mortality. He had survived assassins, rebellions, and wars, but the inevitability of death terrified him. He had conquered everything under heaven. Now he was arrogant enough to believe he could conquer biology itself. The emperor demanded eternal life. His psychosis was fueled by constant assassination attempts. A blind musician named Gao Jianli once tried to bludgeon him with a lead-filled lute. After surviving, the emperor became a phantom in his own capital, constantly moving through a network of secret tunnels between 270 palaces to avoid detection. He poured the GDP of a continent into finding the elixir of life. He dispatched massive naval expeditions like the fleet led by Xu Fu, carrying thousands of youths to find the mythical Mount Penglai. They sailed into the vast ocean and never returned, likely fleeing his wrath. Desperate, he turned to court alchemists. These charlatans concocted glowing pills and potions designed to grant immortality. The primary ingredient? Liquid mercury. They believed the fluid metal contained the essence of eternity. The most powerful man on earth willingly consumed poison. The ultimate historical irony unfolded. The very medicine intended to make him immortal was destroying his brain. Mercury poisoning accelerated his paranoia, causing severe mood swings and hallucinations. The architect of the Chinese Empire was slowly rotting from the inside out, driven mad by his own cure. Despite the pills, he knew death was stalking him, so he prepared the ultimate contingency plan, a necropolis larger than many modern cities. If he could not rule the living forever, he would conquer the afterlife. He ordered the construction of an underground invasion force, the Terracotta Army. 8,000 uniquely sculpted soldiers, archers, and cavalry equipped with real bronze weapons. This was not a passive memorial, it was an active, heavily armed military unit permanently stationed in the dark to protect the emperor from the millions of ghosts he had created. The core of his tomb remains a mystery, untouched by modern archaeologists. Ancient records describe a subterranean palace with ceilings mirroring the cosmos in pearls, and floors featuring rivers of liquid mercury mapped to the geography of his empire. He literally built a mechanical underworld. In 210 BC, during his fifth monumental inspection tour, the emperor's body finally surrendered to the mercury. He traveled in a massive enclosed chariot, terrified of assassins and hiding his rapidly deteriorating health. He isolated himself from the very empire he had bled the world to build. At the Xiang Yu palace, far from his capital, the first emperor died. The man who declared war on death lost the battle. He conquered every rival army, but was ultimately assassinated by his own desperate, paranoid obsession with immortality. The mechanical heart of the Qin dynasty stopped beating. His sudden death created the most dangerous power vacuum in human history. Only two men knew the truth, Chancellor Li Si and the chief eunuch, Zhao Gao. They realized that if the generals or the conquered states learned the tyrant was dead, the empire would instantly shatter into civil war. Zhao Gao, a master manipulator, orchestrated a silent, treasonous coup. He convinced Li Si to suppress the news. Together, they forged a fake imperial edict using the emperor's stolen seal, ordering the capable crown prince Fu Su and the empire's greatest general, Meng Tian, to commit suicide. Fu Su received the forged letter. Bound by the rigid legalist doctrine of absolute obedience and Confucian filial piety, he did not question it. He fell on his own sword. The very system of absolute, unquestioning compliance that Qin Shi Huang designed was weaponized to destroy his only legitimate heir. The conspirators faced a gruesome logistical nightmare, transporting the emperor's decaying body back to the capital through the summer heat without anyone noticing the stench. Their solution was grotesque. They ordered carts of rotting, salted fish to be placed in front of and behind the royal chariot. The irony is historically profound. The supreme architect of China, the man who arrogantly declared his dynasty would rule for 10,000 generations, returned to his capital as a decomposing corpse hidden beneath the foul stench of rotting fish. The illusion of absolute power was literally putrefying. They installed the emperor's weak, foolish younger son, Hu Hai, as a puppet. Known as Qin Shi, he escalated the regime's brutality, but lacked his father's geopolitical genius. The empire was now piloted by a terrified, incompetent child, steered entirely from the shadows by the eunuch Zhao Gao. To consolidate absolute power, Zhao Gao brought a deer to the court and called it a horse. He executed anyone who dared to correct him. This wasn't madness, it was a calculated psychological purge. He demanded loyalty to his power over loyalty to objective reality itself. The rigid legalist machine finally broke. A group of conscripted peasants, delayed by heavy rain, realized the penalty for tardiness was execution. With death guaranteed either way, they chose to fight. A spark in the rain ignited the powder keg, and the supposedly eternal empire began to burn. In 209 BC, the Dazhu village uprising ignited. Two peasant officers, Chen Shen and Wu Guang, delayed by flooded roads, faced execution under Qin law. Realizing death was certain, Chen Shen famously asked, "Are kings and nobles given their high status by birth?" The rebellion was born. This exposes the fatal flaw of extreme legalism. A system designed to prevent uprisings through absolute terror actually guaranteed them. When the penalty for arriving late is the same as the penalty for high treason, treason becomes the only logical choice. The emperor's fear had engineered his empire's doom. The invincible Qin military machine began to stall. Without the first emperor's terrifying unifying oversight, the bureaucratic generals were paralyzed by indecision. Meanwhile, the eunuch Zhao Gao continued purging competent commanders in the capital, effectively lobotomizing the state's defense system from within while the borders burned. From the chaos emerged Xiang Yu, an aristocratic giant from the fallen state of Chu. He was the antithesis of the Qin bureaucracy. Xiang Yu represented the old feudal order seeking apocalyptic vengeance. He was a battlefield god driven by pure, unadulterated rage and generational hatred against Qin. At the Battle of Jiulu, Xiang Yu displayed terrifying psychological warfare. After his army crossed the river, he ordered them to sink their own boats and smash their cooking pots. They had 3 days of rations. It was victory or annihilation. He weaponized the concept of no retreat. Driven by this suicidal desperation, Xiang Yu's forces shattered the main Qin army. The invincible military juggernaut that had ruthlessly conquered 6 states was broken by a man who fought like a mythological demon. The psychological aura of Qin invincibility was permanently destroyed on the battlefield. Simultaneously, a starkly different leader was rising, Liu Bang. A low-ranking peasant official and a rogue, he possessed no aristocratic blood or martial genius. But Liu Bang was a master reader of men. He fought not with brute strength, but with extreme pragmatism and incredible political flexibility. A race to the Qin capital, Xiangyang, began. While Xiang Yu engaged the main Qin armies in brutal frontal assaults, Liu Bang slipped through the weakened defenses. He understood a profound political truth. Capturing the capital wasn't about looting gold, it was about claiming the psychological mandate of heaven. In 206 BC, the third and final Qin emperor, Zi Ying, who had finally assassinated the treacherous Zhao Dao, surrendered to Liu Bang. He rode out in a plain white chariot with a silk ribbon tied around his neck, symbolizing total submission. The eternal dynasty had lasted exactly 15 years. Liu Bang executed a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Instead of slaughtering the capital, he abolished the draconian Qin laws, sealed the treasury, and strictly forbade his troops from looting. By sparing the people, he didn't just conquer a city, he conquered the exhausted hearts of the entire Chinese population. A month later, Xiang Yu arrived at the gates of Xiangyang with a massive, battle-hardened army. He was furious that a peasant like Liu Bang had claimed the ultimate prize first. Xiang Yu was a god of war, and his solution to every political problem was absolute annihilation. He immediately discarded Liu Bang's peaceful transition. Xiang Yu executed the surrendered Emperor Ying and slaughtered the entire Qin royal bloodline. The terrifying legalist capital, which had systematically crushed the souls of millions for a century, was finally drowned in its own karmic bloodshed. Then, Xiang Yu orchestrated the ultimate act of historical vandalism. He set fire to the magnificent Epong Palace, the architectural crown jewel of Qin Shi Huang. Legend says the colossal structures burned continuously for 3 months. Centuries of accumulated literature, art, and imperial wealth were incinerated into dust. His vengeance reached beyond the world of the living. Xiang Yu's troops looted the first emperor's sacred necropolis. They smashed the terracotta army, stealing their real bronze weapons to arm the rebellion. The God Emperor's subterranean fortress, designed for eternity, was violently desecrated by mortal men. Arrogantly, Xiang Yu divided the fallen empire into 18 fractured kingdoms, rewarding his loyal warlords. He declared himself the hegemon king of Western Chu. He didn't want to build a new empire. He wanted to turn the clock back to the chaotic, bloody warring states period, where strength ruled all. Recognizing Liu Bang as his most cunning rival, Xiang Yu exiled him to the remote, unforgiving mountainous region of Han, the ancient equivalent of a geographical prison. Xiang Yu believed he had neutralized the peasant threat forever by locking him behind impassable terrain. Liu Bang accepted his exile with calculated humility. As his army marched into the treacherous mountains via narrow wooden gallery roads built into the cliffs, his brilliant strategist Zhang Lang proposed a masterclass in psychological deception. He told Liu Bang to burn the bridges behind them. Burning the gallery roads served a dual purpose. It prevented Xiang Yu's forces from pursuing them, but more importantly, it broadcast a massive, convincing lie to the hegemon king. I am trapped here forever. I have accepted my fate, and I have absolutely no ambition to return east. While Xiang Yu celebrated his hegemony, constantly fighting minor rebellions caused by his arrogant, heavy-handed diplomacy, Liu Bang quietly rebuilt his strength in the dark. He focused on agriculture, robust logistics, and most importantly, winning the absolute loyalty of the local population through fair governance. The Chu-Han contention had officially begun. It stands as the ultimate historical case study of military genius versus political intelligence. Xiang Yu would go on to win almost every single tactical battle, but Liu Bang was slowly, methodically winning the strategic war for the soul of China. Xiang Yu was a tactical god, but a strategic infant. He micromanaged his campaigns, relying entirely on his own terrifying physical prowess. He believed fear was the only currency of power, alienating potential allies. His arrogance blinded him to the complex political reality of a fractured China. Liu Bang possessed the rarest trait in ancient warlords: absolute self-awareness. He openly admitted he could not command an army like his generals, nor manage logistics like his ministers. Instead of fighting, he mastered the art of delegation. He became a CEO of war, managing brilliant minds. His first pillar was Xiao He, a master administrator. When the peasant army first breached the Qin capital, Generals rushed to loot gold and silk. Xiao He rushed to the imperial archives, seizing maps, census data, and legal records. He understood that data is the true foundation of empire. His second pillar was Zhang Lang, the grand strategist. Zhang Lang operated in the shadows, manipulating rival warlords like pieces on a Go board. He systematically isolated Xiang Yu, secretly funding rebellions in Xiang Yu's rear to keep the hegemon king permanently distracted and geographically overextended. The third pillar was Han Xin, a military prodigy. Xiang Yu had dismissed Han Xin as a lowly halberd bearer. Liu Bang, recognizing his unparalleled genius, shocked his entire army by appointing the unknown soldier as commander-in-chief. It was the greatest talent acquisition in military history. In 206 BC, Han Xin launched his first masterpiece of deception. He ordered his men to visibly repair the burnt wooden gallery roads, drawing the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, he secretly marched the main army through the hidden, treacherous Chenchong Pass. Misdirection became the Han army's deadliest weapon. The unexpected strike devastated the three former Qin generals guarding the border. Liu Bang's army poured out of the mountains like a flood, capturing the Guanzhong region. This wasn't just a military victory, it was the acquisition of the most geographically defensible, agriculturally rich territory in China. With Guanzhong secured, Liu Bang now controlled the ancient heartland of the Qin Empire. Surrounded by natural mountain barriers and fortified passes, he possessed an impregnable base of operations. He could launch endless offensives while his core territory remained completely untouched by the chaos of war. Meanwhile, Xiang Yu was trapped in a bloody quagmire in the eastern state of Qi. Instead of suppressing the rebellion, his policy of massacring prisoners and burning cities only fueled local resistance. The hegemon king was winning every battle, but slowly bleeding his empire to death through sheer brutality. The geopolitical contrast was blinding. Xiang Yu fought to conquer and destroy, leaving ashes in his wake. Liu Bang fought to absorb and integrate. Whenever enemy troops surrendered, Liu Bang incorporated them into his own ranks. His army grew exponentially stronger with every mile he advanced. In 205 BC, Liu Bang amassed a colossal coalition army of 560,000 men. He confidently marched into Xiang Yu's capital, Pangchang, while the hegemon king was distracted campaigning in the north. It seemed like a crushing, effortless victory. But Liu Bang made a fatal error. He let his massive, undisciplined army celebrate prematurely. Xiang Yu's response is the stuff of terrifying military legend. Leaving his slow infantry behind, he personally led a lightning strike force of just 30,000 elite cavalry. He marched relentlessly through the night, covering massive distances to strike the vulnerable, drunken coalition army at the break of dawn. The Battle of Pangchang was a slaughter. Xiang Yu's heavy cavalry smashed through Liu Bang's unorganized lines like a scythed chariot through wheat. Panic spread like a virus through the 500,000 men. The sheer size of Liu Bang's army became its greatest weakness, causing catastrophic bottlenecks as they desperately fled. Over 100,000 coalition soldiers were driven into the Sui River, their bodies reportedly damming the flow of water. Liu Bang barely escaped in a single chariot. In a moment of sheer, ruthless survival instinct, he even kicked his own children out of the carriage to lighten the load and escape faster. This humiliating defeat proved that brute force in the hands of a tactical god could shatter any numerical advantage. Xiang Yu had reasserted his terrifying dominance. But while Xiang Yu won the battle, he failed to capture the CEO. Liu Bang, the master of resilience, survived to fight another day. Retreating to his impregnable base in Guangzhou, Liu Bang relied on his administrator Xiao He. Within months, Xiao He drafted a massive new army and secured endless grain supplies. Xiang Yu fought with finite resources. Liu Bang fought with the infinite economic engine of an entire integrated region. Knowing he could not beat Xiang Yu head-on, Liu Bang unleashed his supreme commander, Han Xin, to conquer the northern kingdoms. Han Xin executed unbelievable military miracles, notably the Battle of Jinxing, where he deliberately fought with his back to a river, weaponizing his own army's desperation to secure victory. Han Xin rapidly subjugated the states of Wei, Zhao, Yan, and Qi. He was systematically amputating Xiang Yu's allies, turning the geopolitical map into a giant closing trap. The hegemon king, previously invincible in the center, was now completely surrounded by the strategic web woven by Liu Bang's generals. By 202 BC, the Chu-Han contention reached its apocalyptic climax at Gaisha. Xiang Yu's exhausted, starving army of 100,000 men was finally cornered by Liu Bang's massive, revitalized coalition of 300,000 troops commanded by the brilliant Han Xin. The grand geopolitical trap had definitively snapped shut. But Han Xin didn't just want to fight Xiang Yu physically, he wanted to break his spirit. In the dead of night, he ordered his soldiers to sing the folk songs of Chu, Xiang Yu's homeland. Hearing the music echoing from all sides, the Chu soldiers believed their homeland had already fallen. The psychological warfare at Gaisha shattered the invincible Chu army. Hearing the songs of their homeland echoing in the dark, Xiang Yu's exhausted soldiers wept. They believed Liu Bang had already conquered their families. By dawn, the hegemon king's massive army had melted away into the mist, deserting him. Knowing the end was near, Xiang Yu shared a tragic farewell with his beloved consort Yu. To ensure she wouldn't become a burden or a hostage, she took her own life with his sword. The god of war, who had slaughtered hundreds of thousands without blinking, finally shed tears. With only 800 elite cavalry left, Xiang Yu violently broke through the Han encirclement. He fought like a cornered demon, riding hundreds of miles until he reached the banks of the Wu River. A boatman offered to ferry him back to his homeland to rebuild his forces, but Xiang Yu refused to cross. His arrogance and sense of honor were his fatal flaws. He had left his homeland with 8,000 young men, and all were dead. Ashamed to face their fathers, he declared, "It is heaven that wants to destroy me, not my failure in battle." In his final stand, Xiang Yu dismounted and fought on foot. He slaughtered hundreds of Han soldiers single-handedly, a terrifying display of supreme martial violence. Then, refusing to give his enemies the satisfaction of killing him, the hegemon king of Western Chu calmly slit his own throat. With Xiang Yu dead, Liu Bang had achieved the impossible. The cunning peasant outsmarted the god of war. In 202 BC, he proclaimed himself Emperor Gaozu, officially founding the Han dynasty. A new era began, one that would deeply shape the cultural identity of China forever. But Liu Bang learned from Qin Shi Huang's mistakes. He didn't enforce absolute terror. He kept the efficient Qin bureaucratic framework but softened the draconian laws, blending legalist structure with Confucian morality. It was the perfect political software, ruthless on the inside, benevolent on the outside. However, the tragedy of supreme power is that once the empire is secure, the men who helped build it become its greatest threats. Han Xin, the brilliant general who had conquered half the continent for Liu Bang, was accused of treason, stripped of his power, and ultimately executed. The brutal, timeless rule of power dynamics was summarized perfectly. When the cunning hares are dead, the hunting dogs are boiled. The fall of the Qin and the rise of the Han offer the ultimate masterclass in geopolitical management. Three men, three entirely different systems of power. Qin Shi Huang built a system based purely on terror and micromanagement. It united the world but collapsed in 15 years because fear exhausts the human soul. Xiang Yu built a system based on pure, unparalleled individual strength and aristocratic pride. He was a superhero in an era that required a CEO. He won every battle but lost the war because an empire cannot be sustained by the physical strength of one man, no matter how great. Liu Bang succeeded because he was a master of political flexibility. He understood that power is not about being the smartest or the strongest in the room. True power is the ability to absorb the strengths of others, delegate authority, and manipulate human nature to serve a unified goal. The Han Dynasty would rule for 400 years. Its cultural impact was so profound that today the majority ethnic group in China still proudly calls themselves the Han people. Liu Bang didn't just win a civil war, he successfully forged the enduring soul of an entire civilization. But look closely and you will see the immortal shadow of the first emperor. The roads, the centralized government, the unified script, the very geopolitical skeleton of the Han Dynasty was built by Qin Shi Huang. He was the hated architect who designed the house that Liu Bang ultimately lived in. History is not just a collection of dusty dates and broken swords, it is the ultimate psychological laboratory. The extremes of the human condition, ambition, paranoia, betrayal, and genius are laid bare when absolute power is on the table. The actors change, but the script remains the terrifying same. We look at Qin Shi Huang and see an ancient tyrant, but examine the modern world. Look at totalitarian states wielding digital surveillance. Look at corporate monopolies crushing competitors with ruthless efficiency. The legalist desire for total, unyielding control over the human mind did not die in 210 BC. We look at Xiang Yu and see a tragic hero, but his flaw is the ultimate warning for any modern leader, CEO, or entrepreneur. The Superman syndrome. The arrogant belief that you must fight every battle yourself is the fastest route to burnout, isolation, and catastrophic failure. And we look at Liu Bang, the illiterate peasant who conquered the world. He proves that emotional intelligence, adaptability, and the humility to employ people smarter than yourself are the true mechanics of empire building. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, you just need to own the room. The dust has settled on the warring states. The terracotta army stands silent in the dark. The Yipeng Palace is just a memory of ash. But the psychological blueprint of how to build, control, and lose an empire remains perfectly intact, waiting for the next ambitious architect to claim it. The empires of the past may be dust, but their lessons are still actively pulling the invisible strings of our world today. If you want to master the rules of the game, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay vigilant.